Imagine a world without cities, without writing, without even the wheel. For most of human history, this was our reality. We were wanderers, hunters, and gatherers, moving with the seasons. But then, something extraordinary happened. In a sun-scorched land between two rivers, a revolution began that would change the course of humanity forever. This is the story of Sumer, the cradle of civilization, and the birth of the very first cities. Our journey takes us back over 6,000 years to a region the ancient Greeks called Mesopotamia, meaning the land between the rivers. Specifically, we're heading to its southern part, a fertile crescent fed by the mighty Tigris and Euphrates. This land, known as Sumer, wasn't always a paradise. It was a challenging environment with scorching summers, unpredictable floods, and vast marshes. Yet it was here, against all odds, that our ancestors decided to stop wandering and start building. So what was the secret ingredient? Why here? The answer lies in one word: agriculture. The people of Sumer weren't the first farmers, but they were the first masters of large-scale agriculture. They figured out how to tame the wild rivers, digging intricate networks of canals and irrigation channels to water their fields. This wasn't just about growing a little extra food. It was a game changer. For the first time, they could produce a reliable surplus of grain, more than they needed just to survive. This surplus was the spark that ignited civilization. With enough food to go around, not everyone had to be a farmer anymore. People could specialize. Some became potters, creating vessels to store grain and water. Others became weavers, toolmakers, or priests. This division of labor was the foundation of a complex society. People started living together in larger, permanent settlements to manage the irrigation systems and protect their precious harvests. These settlements grew, and soon they became something the world had never seen before: cities. Welcome to Uruk, one of the world's first true cities. By around 3000 BC, Uruk was a bustling metropolis, home to tens of thousands of people. Imagine walking through its streets. You'd see massive defensive walls stretching for miles, protecting the city from outsiders. At its heart, you'd find monumental temples called ziggurats, towering stepped pyramids dedicated to the city's patron god or goddess. These weren't just places of worship. They were the administrative and economic centers of the city. Priests and scribes managed the granaries, collected taxes, and organized public works. The ziggurat was the skyscraper of its day, a symbol of the city's power and its connection to the heavens. Life in a Sumerian city was vibrant and organized. Markets buzzed with activity, where farmers traded barley for pottery, textiles, or metal tools. Craftsmen worked in dedicated districts, their skills passed down through generations. But managing a city of this size created a new problem. How do you keep track of everything? How do you record who paid their grain tax, how much wool was traded, or what laws the king decreed? Memory alone wasn't enough. The Sumerians needed a system, and their solution was one of the greatest inventions in human history: writing. It started simply with pictures or pictograms representing objects. A drawing of a head of grain meant grain. A drawing of a cow meant a cow, but this was cumbersome. Over time, these pictures evolved into a more abstract and efficient system of wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay tablets. We call it cuneiform. Cuneiform unlocked a new world. For the first time, humans could record their history, their laws, their myths, and their knowledge in a permanent form. We have found thousands of these clay tablets, giving us an incredible window into their world. We have receipts for beer, epic poems like the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest works of literature school texts for young scribes, and even letters complaining about the poor quality of copper shipments. Writing allowed for complex administration, long-distance trade, and the accumulation of knowledge across generations. Society could now grow in complexity and scale in ways previously unimaginable. And the Sumerian innovations didn't stop there. Think about the wheel. It's such a fundamental part of our world that we take it for granted. But it had to be invented somewhere, and the earliest evidence for the potter's wheel, and later the wheeled vehicle, comes from Sumer. Imagine the impact of the first carts pulled by donkeys or oxen. Suddenly, goods and people could be transported over land with unprecedented ease. It revolutionized trade, agriculture, and warfare. The Sumerians were also brilliant mathematicians and astronomers. They developed a number system based on 60, which we can still see today in our 60-second minute, 60-minute hour, and 360-degree circle. They meticulously tracked the movements of the stars and planets, creating accurate calendars to predict seasons and festivals. This wasn't just for religious purposes. It was essential for their agricultural society, telling them the best times to plant and harvest. But Sumer wasn't a single unified empire. It was a collection of independent city-states like Uruk, Ur, Eridu, and Lagash. Each city had its own king, its own patron deity, and its own army. And as you might expect, they didn't always get along. They competed for land, water, and trade routes, leading to frequent conflicts. We have records of epic battles and heroic kings, the first documented wars in human history. This competition, while destructive, also drove innovation in military technology and strategy. Sumerian society was hierarchical. At the top was the king, who was seen as the god's representative on earth. Below him were the priests and scribes, the intellectual elite. Then came the merchants, artisans, and farmers. At the very bottom were the enslaved, often prisoners of war or people who had fallen into debt. It was a complex social structure, a far cry from the more egalitarian hunter-gatherer bands of the past. Despite their incredible achievements, the Sumerian civilization eventually declined. Centuries of irrigation led to a buildup of salt in the soil, making it less fertile. Constant warfare between the city-states weakened them. Eventually, they were conquered by new groups, like the Akkadians and the Babylonians, who built upon the foundations the Sumerians had laid. But the legacy of Sumer never truly disappeared. Their inventions and ideas spread throughout the ancient world, influencing nearly every civilization that followed in the Middle East, Europe, and beyond. Writing, the wheel, law, astronomy, the city itself, all of these cornerstones of modern life have their roots in the sun-baked plains of southern Mesopotamia. So the next time you look at a clock, write a sentence, or even just live in a town or city, take a moment to remember the Sumerians. These ancient pioneers, living between two rivers, took the first, daring steps out of prehistory and into the world of civilization. They showed us how to build, how to organize, and how to record our own story. They laid the groundwork for the world we know today, proving that even in the harshest of environments, human ingenuity can create something truly revolutionary. Have you ever wondered where it all began? Not just history, but the very idea of civilization itself. The cities we live in, the laws that govern us. Even the words you're rereading right now, all of it has roots that stretch back thousands of years to a sun-scorched land between two rivers. This is the story of Sumer, the cradle of civilization, where humanity first learned to write, to build, and to dream of order in a chaotic world. Picture this. It's over 6,000 years ago. The land we now call southern Iraq was a fertile crescent, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This wasn't just any piece of land. The Greeks would later call it Mesopotamia, meaning the land between the rivers. And it was here that a remarkable people, the Sumerians, decided to settle down. Before Sumer, humans were mostly nomadic, wandering in small groups, following the seasons and the herds. But the Sumerians saw the potential in this rich, alluvial soil. They weren't just passing through. They were here to stay. They began to build permanent settlements, which over time grew into something the world had never seen before. Cities. We're talking about legendary names like Uruk, Ur, and Eridu. These weren't just collections of huts. They were bustling centers of innovation, trade, and culture, with populations numbering in the tens of thousands. To support these massive populations, the Sumerians needed a revolutionary idea: agriculture on a grand scale. They became master engineers, digging intricate networks of irrigation canals to tame the unpredictable rivers. This system turned the dry plains into a bountiful breadbasket, capable of producing surplus food. And that surplus changed everything. For the first time, not everyone had to be a farmer. People could specialize. You could be a potter, a weaver, a priest, or a builder. This division of labor was the engine that powered Sumerian society forward, creating a complex social structure with a king at the top, followed by priests, scribes, merchants, and laborers. But as these cities grew more complex, a new problem emerged. How do you keep track of everything? How do you record who owns which plot of land, how much grain is in the temple granary, or how many sheep were traded? Memory alone wasn't going to cut it. The Sumerians needed a system. And what they invented would arguably become humanity's greatest creation: writing. It started simply with little pictograms, a drawing of a head of barley to represent barley, a picture of an ox for an ox. These were pressed onto wet clay tablets using a reed stylus. But this was slow and cumbersome. Over centuries, these pictures evolved. They became more abstract, more stylized, until they were no longer pictures but symbols representing sounds. This was the birth of cuneiform, one of the world's first true writing systems. The wedge-shaped marks made by the stylus gave cuneiform its distinctive look. Suddenly, humanity had an external memory. Knowledge could be stored, passed down, and built upon. Scribes, the elite few who could read and write, became some of the most powerful people in society. They recorded everything: economic transactions, royal decrees, religious hymns, and even the first works of literature, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, a grand tale of heroes, gods, and the search for immortality. Writing wasn't just for accounting anymore. It was for storytelling, for preserving culture, for capturing the human experience. With bustling cities and a way to record information, the Sumerians faced their next great challenge. How do you get thousands of people, with competing interests and desires, to live together peacefully? You need rules. You need laws. Before Sumer, justice was often a personal or family matter, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It was raw, often brutal and inconsistent. The Sumerians sought a better way. They believed that justice should come from the gods, administered by their earthly representative, the king. The idea was to create a system of order that was impartial and applied to everyone. One of the earliest examples we have of this is the Code of Ur-Nammu. Written around 2100 BCE, this is one of the oldest surviving law codes in history, predating the more famous Code of Hammurabi by about 3 centuries. The Code of Ur-Nammu wasn't just a list of punishments. It was a statement of principles. The prologue declares that the king was chosen by the gods to establish justice in the land, to banish wickedness and evil, so that the strong might not oppress the weak. Think about how profound that is. It's the birth of the concept of social justice, the idea that the law exists to protect the vulnerable. The laws themselves covered a wide range of issues: property rights, marriages, divorce, inheritance, and criminal offenses. And while some punishments were harsh by our standards, many were surprisingly sophisticated. Instead of pure retribution, the code often prescribed financial compensation for damages. If a man accidentally injured another, he didn't necessarily lose an eye in return. He paid a fine in silver. This was a monumental shift from personal vengeance to state-adjudicated justice. It was an attempt to create a predictable, stable society where conflicts could be resolved through a known process rather than through violence. These laws were inscribed on stone pillars, or stelae, and placed in public squares for all to see. Of course, most people couldn't read, but the message was clear. There are rules. They are public, and they come from the highest authority. This was the foundation of the rule of law. It's the idea that society should be governed by established principles, not by the arbitrary whims of individuals. Every time you sign a contract, appeal to a court, or expect your rights to be protected, you are enjoying the legacy of these ancient Sumerian legal thinkers. So you have cities, a surplus of food, specialized labor, writing, and law. What does all this add up to? It adds up to order. The Sumerians were obsessed with creating order out of the chaos of the natural world and human nature. Their religion reflected this. They believed in a pantheon of powerful, often unpredictable gods who controlled everything from the weather to the harvest. To appease these gods and maintain cosmic order, they built massive temple complexes at the heart of their cities, called ziggurats. These stepped pyramids were stairways to the heavens, physical links between the earthly and the divine. The priests who ran these temples held immense power, as they were the intermediaries who kept the universe in balance. The Sumerian legacy is staggering. They invented the wheel, or at least were one of the first to put it to widespread use. Their understanding of mathematics and astronomy was incredible for its time. They developed a sexagesimal system based on the number 60, which is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. They charted the stars, named constellations, and created the zodiac. They built the first great cities, wrote the first stories, and codified the first laws. But like all great civilizations, Sumer's time eventually came to an end. After millennia of dominance, a combination of internal conflicts, environmental changes like increasing soil salinity, and invasions by neighboring peoples like the Akkadians and Babylonians led to their decline. The Sumerian language faded from use, and their great cities slowly crumbled, buried by the sands of time. For thousands of years, Sumer was lost to history, a forgotten chapter in the human story. It wasn't until the 19th century that archaeologists, deciphering cuneiform tablets, rediscovered this incredible civilization and began to piece together their story. And what they found was a mirror. In the lives of the Sumerians, we see our own struggles, our own ambitions. We see the timeless human desire to build, to create, to understand, and to impose order on a complex world. From the first scratch on a clay tablet to the vast legal frameworks that underpin modern society, the echo of Sumer is all around us. They laid the foundation. They wrote the first draft of civilization. And we are still living in the world they helped create. Before time, before light, before anything we could possibly name, there was only the sea. Not a sea of water as we know it, but a vast, formless, and eternal abyss of chaos. The Sumerians, one of the earliest known civilizations, called her Namu. She was the primeval mother, the self-created source from whom all existence would eventually spring forth. Imagine an endless, silent ocean, holding within its depths the potential for everything. It is from this profound emptiness that the story of our universe and our place within it begins. From the boundless waters of Namu, the first cosmic stirrings occurred. Two entities, two fundamental principles of the universe, were born. First came An, the majestic god of the heavens, a vast, star-strewn dome arching over everything. Then came Ki, the goddess of the earth, solid, fertile, and foundational. They were not separate entities floating in space. They were born locked in a tight, inseparable embrace, forming a single cosmic mountain that pierced the primordial sea. And the sky and Ki, the earth, were one. Their union was the first act of creation, the very first structure in a previously unstructured void. But for the world to truly take shape, this union had to be broken. From the embrace of An and Ki, a new god was born, Enlil, the god of the air, the wind, and the storm. He was a force of immense power and will. Seeing the world trapped in this static embrace, Enlil made a momentous decision. With a mighty breath, a cosmic gust of wind, he pushed his father, and the sky, upwards, and his mother, Ki the earth, downwards. This was the great separation, the act that carved out the space we inhabit. The sky became a distant canopy, the earth a stable ground, and the air, Enlil's own domain, filled the space between. This wasn't an act of violence, but one of necessary creation, establishing the fundamental order and structure of the universe as the Sumerians knew it. The stage was now set for a pantheon of gods to populate this newly ordered cosmos. With the sky and earth separated, the family of the gods, the Anunnaki, began to grow. The pantheon was vast and complex, each deity governing a specific aspect of existence. One of the most important was Enlil's brother, Enki, also known as Aa. Enki was the god of wisdom, magic, and the sweet, life-giving fresh water that flows beneath the earth. He was a master craftsman, an inventor, and the keeper of the divine laws, known as the Mi. These Mi were not just rules. They were the sacred blueprints for civilization itself, everything from kingship and justice to brickmaking and writing. Enki resided in his watery abyss, the Abzu, from where he cleverly and often trickily guided the destiny of both gods and mortals. Alongside him were other powerful figures: Nana, the moon god who illuminated the night; Utu, the sun god, and dispenser of justice; and the formidable Inanna, goddess of love, fertility, and war. Together, they governed the natural forces and social structures that shaped the Sumerian world. Life for the gods was not entirely idyllic. They had to maintain the cosmos, dig canals for irrigation, and build their celestial cities. It was hard, grueling work. Tired of their endless labor, the gods began to complain. Their grievances reached the wise Enki, who along with the mother goddess Ninhursag, devised a brilliant solution. They would create a new kind of being, a worker, to take on the burden of their toil. Gathering clay from the fertile banks of the rivers, they mixed it with the blood of a sacrificed god, infusing the new creatures with a spark of divine intelligence. From this mixture, they fashioned the first humans. Fragile, mortal, and dependent, humanity was brought into existence for a single clear purpose: to serve the gods. This creation story reveals the core of the Sumerian worldview. For them, the universe was a divinely ordered state, and humanity's role was clearly defined within it. We were not created as equals to the gods, nor as masters of the earth. We were created as servants, whose purpose was to provide for the gods, to build their temples, offer them sacrifices, and sing their praises. By performing these duties, humanity helped to maintain the cosmic order that the gods had established when they separated the sky from the earth. Every ritual, every prayer, every brick laid for a ziggurat was an act that reinforced the structure of the universe and kept the forces of chaos at bay. This was not seen as a burden, but as a sacred responsibility, a meaningful existence in a cosmos governed by powerful and often unpredictable divine forces. Humanity's fate was forever tied to the will of the heavens. So the next time you look up at the vast night sky or feel the solid earth beneath your feet, remember the ancient Sumerians. For them, this wasn't just a random collection of matter. It was a deliberate creation, born from a primeval sea, ordered by powerful gods, and maintained by the tireless service of humanity. Their myths provided not just an explanation for how the world came to be, but a profound understanding of their place within it. It's a story of chaos and order, of creation and purpose that laid the groundwork for many of the creation stories that would follow. It's a powerful reminder that for millennia, we have looked to the heavens and asked the same fundamental questions. Where did we come from? And why are we here? Have you ever wondered where it all began? Not just history, but the very idea of a king, a city, or even a war. Today, we're journeying back almost 5,000 years to a land between two rivers, the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia. This is the story of Sumer, the cradle of civilization, where humanity first built cities, crowned kings, and fought for power. This isn't just ancient history. It's the blueprint for the world we live in today. So picture this, the land we now call southern Iraq around 3000 BC. The Sumerians, a people of mysterious origin, have already accomplished incredible things. They've invented writing, the wheel, and monumental architecture. They've built bustling cities like Uruk, Ur, and Lagash, each a world unto itself, protected by massive mud brick walls. These weren't just settlements. They were the world's first city-states, each with its own patron god and, crucially, its own ruler. In the earliest days, power might have been more communal, held by councils of elders or assemblies of citizens. Priests, who acted as intermediaries to the gods, held immense influence. The temple or ziggurat wasn't just a place of worship. It was the economic and administrative heart of the city. But as cities grew and competed for precious resources like water and land, a new kind of leader emerged, the Lugal, or big man. We would call him a king. These early kings were often military leaders, strongmen who rose to prominence by defending their city or leading it in conquest. Their legitimacy was a powerful mix of divine blessing and military might. They claimed to be chosen by the gods, the earthly shepherds of the people. One of the earliest legendary figures is Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk. While the Epic of Gilgamesh is a mythological tale of gods and monsters, its hero was likely a real historical king who built Uruk's famous walls. The story itself gives us a glimpse into the Sumerian ideal of kingship, a builder, a protector, and a figure of immense strength, but also one who grapples with mortality and the burdens of rule. The history of Sumer is essentially a long, dramatic saga of these city-states vying for dominance. Think of it like a 500-year-long game of Risk. The main players were cities like Kish, Uruk, Ur, and Lagash. Control of fertile land, and more importantly, the canals that irrigated it, was the ultimate prize. If your rival upstream dammed a canal, your city's crops would wither and your people would starve. So, conflicts were inevitable and often brutal. One of the most famous and well-documented conflicts was the long-running border dispute between Lagash and its neighbor, Umma. We know so much about this because of an incredible artifact known as the Stele of the Vultures. This carved stone monument, commissioned by King Enedim of Lagash around 2450 BC, is basically a war memorial and a piece of royal propaganda rolled into one. It depicts the soldiers of Lagash marching in a tight phalanx formation, trampling over the bodies of their enemies from Umma. Vultures are shown carrying away the severed heads of the defeated. It's graphic, it's brutal, and it's one of the world's first visual records of organized warfare. Enedim doesn't just celebrate his victory. He records the terms of the peace treaty, drawing a new border and setting up monuments to mark it. Of course, this peace didn't last. The struggle between Lagash and Umma would flare up again and again for generations. This period, known as the early dynastic period, was defined by this constant back and forth. A powerful king would rise, conquer his neighbors, and declare himself King of Kish, a title that signified a broader regional authority. But these early empires were fragile. They were often held together by the personal strength of one ruler. When that king died, his sons would squabble, and the conquered cities would rebel, shattering the empire back into its component parts. It was a relentless cycle of consolidation and fragmentation. Then came a man who would break the cycle, at least for a time. His name was Lugalsagesi. Originally the king of Umayyas, Lagash's old rival Lugalsagesi was ambitious. Around 2350 BC, he embarked on a stunning campaign of conquest. He defeated Lagash, sacked the city, and went on to unite all of Sumer under his rule, from the Lower Sea, the Persian Gulf, to the Upper Sea, the Mediterranean. For the first time, one king ruled the entire land. He moved his capital to Uruk and declared a new era of peace and prosperity. But his reign, though momentous, was destined to be short. Because a new power was rising to the north in the land of Akkad. A man of humble origins, Sargon, who had served as a cupbearer in the court of the king of Kish, seized power and set his sights on the south. Sargon of Akkad was a military genius. He met Lugalsagesi in a series of battles, ultimately defeating him. According to the story, Sargon captured Lugalsagesi, put him in a neckstock, and paraded him in disgrace at the gate of the god Enlil in Nippur, the religious center of Sumer. Sargon's victory marked a profound shift. He wasn't just another Sumerian king. He was an Akkadian, a Semitic-speaking outsider. He created what many historians consider the world's first true empire. Unlike the fragile alliances of the Sumerian kings, Sargon's empire was centrally controlled. He installed loyal governors in the conquered cities, standardized weights and measures, and created a standing army to enforce his rule. He and his successors, like the formidable Naram Sin who declared himself a living god, ruled for over a century. The Akkadian Empire was a new model of power, one based on absolute military control. But empires, as we know, are hard to hold together. Internal rebellions and external pressures from mountain tribes, known as the Gushans, eventually caused the Akkadian Empire to collapse. Sumer descended into a period of chaos, a dark age. The Sumerian king list, an ancient text that chronicles the rulers of Sumer, bleakly states, who was king? Who was not king? It was a time of confusion and fragmentation. Yet Sumer was not finished. Out of the chaos, the city of Ur rose once more. Under its king, Ur-Nammu, and his son, Shulgi, Sumerian civilization experienced its final brilliant renaissance. This is known as the Third Dynasty of Ur, or the Neo-Sumerian Empire. Ur-Nammu drove out the Gushans and re-established order. He is most famous for giving the world its oldest surviving law code, predating the famous Code of Hammurabi by centuries. The Code of Ur-Nammu wasn't about an eye for an eye. It focused on fines and compensation, a remarkably sophisticated legal system for its time. His son, Shulgi, reigned for an impressive 48 years, consolidating the empire, reorganizing the state, reforming the scribal schools, and promoting a grand revival of Sumerian literature and art. The great ziggurat of Ur, whose ruins still stand today, was completed during this period, a testament to the power and piety of these last Sumerian kings. For a glorious century, it seemed that Sumerian culture had triumphed. But the old pressures never went away. Nomadic peoples, the Amorites, pressed in from the west, while the kingdom of Elam threatened from the east. The empire's highly centralized bureaucracy began to crack under the strain. Provinces broke away. Finally, around 2004 BC, the Elamites swept in and sacked the magnificent city of Ur. They captured its last king, Ibisin, and dragged him away in chains. A heartbreaking poem, The Lament for Ur, mourns the city's destruction. O Ur, your righteous song has been transformed into a bitter lament. With the fall of Ur, the political independence of the Sumerians was over. Their language would slowly fade from daily use, becoming a scholarly and religious language, much like Latin in the Middle Ages, but their legacy was indestructible. The new powers that rose in Mesopotamia, the Babylonians and the Assyrians, were standing on the shoulders of giants. They inherited Sumerian writing, religion, law, and concepts of kingship. The struggles for power, the clash of city-states, the rise and fall of empires, this entire political drama, first played out on the plains of Sumer, would become the repeating pattern of human history for millennia to come. So the next time you hear about a new law being passed, or see a monument to a national leader, or read about a conflict over borders and resources, remember the Sumerians. They were the ones who wrote the first draft of civilization, a story of kings, wars, and an unending struggle for power, etched in clay nearly 5,000 years ago. What if I told you that the world's very first civilization, the one that gave us writing, the wheel, and the 60-second minute, didn't just fade away, it collapsed in a perfect storm of disaster? This is the epic story of Sumer, the cradle of civilization, and how it all came crashing down. Thousands of years ago, in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in modern-day Iraq, a remarkable people emerged. The Sumerians weren't just building mud brick houses. They were building the future. They invented cuneiform, the first ever system of writing, not for poetry, but to keep track of their grain and sheep. Talk about practical. They developed complex irrigation systems, transforming arid land into a breadbasket. Their cities, like Ur, Uruk, and Lagash, were bustling hubs of innovation, trade, and culture, each with its own king and its own patron god watching from a towering ziggurat. For nearly 2,000 years, Sumer was the center of the known world, a beacon of human ingenuity. They gave us law codes, epic poems like Gilgamesh, and the very concept of the city-state. It seemed like their golden age would last forever. But even the mightiest civilizations have an Achilles heel, and for Sumer, it was buried in the very soil that gave them life. The secret to Sumer's success was its agriculture, and the key to its agriculture was irrigation. By diverting water from the Tigris and Euphrates, they could grow massive surpluses of barley and wheat. This surplus fed their growing cities, supported their priests and kings, and fueled their trade networks. But this miracle of engineering came with a hidden cost. The river water they used was rich in mineral salts. In the hot Mesopotamian climate, water on the fields evaporated quickly, leaving behind a thin white layer of salt. Year after year, century after century, this process repeated. Slowly but surely, the very lifeblood of their civilization was poisoning their land. This process is called soil salinization. Imagine trying to grow a garden and accidentally watering it with salt water every day. At first, you might not notice. But over time, the plants wither, the soil turns barren, and the garden dies. That's exactly what happened to Sumer, but on a massive scale. Their crop yields, which were once the envy of the ancient world, began to plummet. We can actually see this in their own records. Early Sumerian texts show a healthy mix of wheat and barley. But wheat is very sensitive to salt. Over time, records show farmers switching almost entirely to barley, a much more salt-tolerant grain. It was a clever adaptation, but it was also a sign of desperation. They were running out of good land. The surplus that had built their entire society was shrinking. Less food meant hunger, social unrest, and a civilization living on borrowed time. On top of this slow-motion disaster, the climate was also changing. Evidence suggests a series of severe, prolonged droughts hit the region, further stressing their already fragile agricultural system. The rivers that had given them life were now threatening to take it all away. As resources became scarcer, tensions boiled over. The once cooperative Sumerian city-states began to look at each other not as neighbors, but as rivals. The fight for fertile land and precious water turned ugly. We have records, like the stele of the vultures, that graphically depict brutal wars between cities like Lagash and Umma. These weren't just minor skirmishes. They were total wars, fought for survival. Kings built massive walls around their cities, not just to keep foreign invaders out, but to protect themselves from their own Sumerian brethren. This constant infighting drained their resources, wasted manpower, and left them deeply divided. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and Sumer was becoming a collection of warring factions, each looking out for itself. This internal weakness made them a ripe target for outsiders. To the north, a new power was rising, the Akkadians. Led by the legendary Sargon the Great. The Akkadians were a Semitic-speaking people with a different culture and a burning ambition. Sargon wasn't interested in just one city. He wanted to rule them all. Around 2334 BC, he launched a series of brilliant military campaigns, sweeping down from the north and conquering the bickering Sumerian city-states one by one. For the first time, the entire region was united under a single ruler, creating the world's first empire. The age of Sumerian independence was over. The Akkadian Empire ruled for about 150 years, but its collapse plunged the region back into chaos. The Sumerians briefly regained control during a period known as the Third Dynasty of Ur. It was a last, glorious flicker of the old Sumerian flame. They rebuilt temples, revived their culture, and re-centralized power. But the underlying problems, the salty soil, the damaged environment, had never gone away. The final blow came from two directions. From the west, nomadic tribes called the Amorites began migrating into the region, putting pressure on the cities. And from the east, the Elamites, an old rival, saw their chance. In approximately 2004 BC, the Elamites swept in, sacked the great capital city of Ur, and dragged its last king away in chains. And with that, the light of Sumerian civilization was extinguished for good. The Sumerian language died out, surviving only in the writings of scribes. Their cities crumbled into dust, buried by the sands of time. So how did the world's first civilization fall? It wasn't one single event. It was a cascade of failures. Environmental degradation, caused by their own success, poisoned their land. Climate change brought devastating droughts. Internal conflict turned brother against brother, weakening them from within. And finally, external invasions delivered the knockout punch. It's a sobering tale that shows how even the most advanced societies are vulnerable when they fail to manage their environment and live peacefully with their neighbors. But the story of Sumer doesn't end with its collapse. Their legacy is all around us. Every time you check the time on your watch, you're using their base 60 system. The story of a great flood, found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, echoes in later religious texts. Their legal codes laid the groundwork for justice systems to come. Their breakthroughs in astronomy, mathematics, and architecture were passed on to the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and eventually the Greeks and Romans. Sumer may have fallen, but its ideas built the world we live in today. They were the first, and their story is a powerful reminder of the delicate balance between innovation, environment, and human nature. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to the dawn of civilization. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the epic history of our world. Let me know in the comments which ancient civilization you'd like to explore next. See you in the next video.